height of its popularity, Chippendale's exotic male dance troupe played to sellout crowds. People across the country shelled out millions to see them. Then one of the founding partners was murdered, and New York City police were left with no leads. When the suspect finally did emerge, the chase would take the FBI to another continent in the hopes of solving the backstage murder.
In the 1980s, two partners created a nightclub that would bring them wealth and international fame. The male strip club phenomenon promised female patrons fun and excitement, but the bright lights hid a dark side. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI would launch a sting operation spanning 2 continents to bring down a man who killed for profit.
New York City is famous for its show business tradition. Within a 4-block radius of Times Square, hundreds of offices are rented by producers looking for their next hit. One such place was on the 15th floor of a building on West 40th Street. In 1987, it was home to Unicorn Productions. Nick DeNoia was its founder and president. Curiously, the 5-time Emmy Award-winning children's television producer became best known as the producer and vice president of Chippendales, the exotic male dancers. On April 7th, 1987, he was gunned down.
Nick.
A colleague heard the shot. He found DeNoia dead on the floor and called 911.
May I help you?
Oh, yes. A man has just been shot in my office.
Hold on, please. I have to connect you with the ambulance service.
Oh, please.
Certainly.
Emergency vehicles arrived moments later. NYPD crime technicians gathered evidence. They recovered a shell casing from a 9mm automatic weapon. DeNoia's colleague told homicide detective Michael Geddes that a strange man had entered the office just prior to the shooting.
He said maybe about a half hour ago, or 45 minutes ago, somebody came into the office and said to him, "Are you Nick?" And he said, "No, Nick is in the other office, and he's busy right now."
Without looking up from his work, the associate pointed the man to DeNoia's office. He never saw the stranger's face. The witness told detectives that moments later, he noticed the same man in the bathroom.
While he was in the bathroom, he heard this guy leaving the bathroom, and a couple of seconds later, he heard the door to his office open up. And then he heard a gunshot.
The last sound the witness heard was the exit door to the stairwell swing open, then close. Detective Geddes traced the killer's path, hoping to find something along the way that would point to his identity.
I took down the route that I thought that the shooter might have taken to see if there was any evidence or anything. And I ran down the 15 floors, I believe it was. And when I got down to the end, there was 2 exits. One would lead to the lobby area, one would lead to the freight elevator area. So I exited out of the freight elevator area, then came back in and exited out of the lobby area just to get a feel for the scene.
On the ground floor, detectives investigated the freight area. They dusted for prints, but were unable to lift any that were usable. The freight elevator operator had seen a man run through the door and out to the street.
Had you ever seen him before?
He recalled that the suspect wore jeans and had dark hair.
He also gave us the exit of how the fella came out of the building as he exited the building on 40th Street, and when he came out, he made a left towards 8th Avenue.
Upstairs, two city detectives arrived with Nick DeNoia's brother Val from New Jersey to identify the body. The men had been close. Val was devastated by the sight of his murdered brother. Afterwards, Val DeNoia came to the precinct to help investigators in any way he could. Nick's brother wanted the case solved as soon as possible. Detective Geddes hoped Val knew something that could provide a solid lead.
Being a detective, one of the hardest things to do is to tell somebody, you know, that, hey, we're not going to be able to solve this case right away unless you know something that can help us. And I explained to him at that time, I said, look, if it was something that happened here in the New York area, maybe it was a business relationship here or a relationship, a love relationship, or some kind of emotional type of relationship, we have a good shot of solving that crime right away.
For Val DeNoia, one name came to mind, his brother's business partner, Steve Banerjee. Banerjee had known Nick DeNoia since the early 80s. Val told the detective that his brother met him in Los Angeles. Nick DeNoia had traveled to LA hoping to build upon the success he enjoyed in New York. The five-time Emmy Award-winning producer fielded many offers, but one man in particular was relentless in his pursuit. Steve Banerjee, the East Indian immigrant and entrepreneur who had dreamt up Chippendale's male exotic dance revue, wanted DeNoia to fashion a more refined act. Though ladies-only nights in LA were extremely popular, Banerjee wanted a dance troupe worthy enough to draw audiences in New York and Las Vegas. He believed that Nick DeNoia was the man who could make that dream come true. Val DeNoia said that his brother was reluctant at first, feeling the act was too sleazy. When Banerjee promised him all touring rights and 50% of its proceeds, DeNoia accepted the offer. Nick polished the routine and booked the troupe at Club Magique in New York. The newly styled Chippendales dancers became an instant hit. But shortly after his success, Val told the detective that Nick's relationship with Banerjee had soured. Banerjee demanded a larger percentage of the touring profits, but Nick refused to give in.
They were always constantly arguing, and they were arguing about different ends of the business, and, you know, it's just like regular business partners, you know, but they were having trouble. And DeNoia was starting to take his troupe out, and he was going to form a new business.
He was doing very well.
In the weeks prior to his death, Nick was negotiating touring deals for a troupe he designed to compete directly with Chippendales. Stealing market share from Chippendales could cost Banerjee millions. Val offered the detectives his brother's financial records. NYPD set up surveillance at Nick DeNoia's funeral since detectives suspected he'd been murdered by someone he knew. Nick's brother would help identify as many mourners as possible. Nick's partner, Steve Banerjee, was among those who paid their respects. The following day, investigators phoned Banerjee in California to inquire about his relationship with his late partner. For Detective Geddes, the interview had a subtler agenda than fact-finding.
We were trying to get what we call a negative interview, you know, where if he says, no, I had nothing to do with it, we were great friends, and things like that, just to try to disprove things that were starting to be said, so if later on it was involved with him, we could just tie it all together.
You know, it's, like I said to you, it's
Banerjee
real
never
pity.
contradicted what police already knew.
You know,
He acknowledged that he and DeNoia did not get along and admitted that he was upset that his partner had formed a new dance troupe.
Someone who could verify that for you.
any help that I can do, officer. do
Banerjee
let me
added
know.
that on April 7th, the day of the murder, he had been in Los Angeles the entire day.
Yeah, you know.
That did not rule out the possibility that a hitman had been hired,
Thank you very much.
but detectives had nothing to prove it. The DeNoia family offered a substantial reward for anyone who came forward with information. Police received several calls, but none panned out.
We always felt this fellow, Steve Banerjee, had something to do with it, but nobody could really give us any concrete evidence or even steer us in the direction of where we could tie anybody into what happened.
Lacking any other leads, the freight elevator operator from DeNoia's building provided his description of the man he saw run from the stairwell. Though he had seen him only briefly, police hoped it would be enough to prompt someone else's memory.
Pretty much.
Police canvassed the lobby of DeNoia's office building well into the evening. They asked everyone who worked there if they recognized the sketch. None did. The killer had apparently vanished in the middle of a workday amongst millions of New York City commuters.
Well, basically the investigation just, it kind of hit a brick wall. And we really weren't going anywhere with it. We had a sketch that was out there. There was a reward that was out there. There was we even put it on television, trying to get some assistance, figuring if the person that did this was from another state, that somebody would give us the information. But we constantly hit that brick wall and it wasn't going anywhere.
No new leads surfaced. To New York City police, it looked as if the killer had gotten away with murder. Four years had passed since Chippendale's choreographer Nick DeNoia had been murdered in his Manhattan office. The case remained unsolved. Then, in July 1991, over 2,500 miles away, Special Agent Dan West at the FBI's Las Vegas field office received a call. It was from a man who claimed he had been hired to kill two people for $25,000.
I immediately wasn't sure whether or not he was just a prank call. It's not unusual for the FBI, especially in Las Vegas on a weekend, to receive prank calls, a lot of alcohol flowing. So I asked him to give me specific details of the alleged planned murder.
The caller said that a man named Ray Cologne had hired him to kill two managers of a male exotic dance troupe touring England. They were competitors of the Chippendales dancers. The source said he did not know why Cologne wanted the men dead, but for some reason the would-be hitman had decided not to go through with it.
I'm not sure if the source backed out because of Good Samaritan reasons or because he chickened out. He flew to England and then flew back to the United States almost immediately. I think he flew into Los Angeles, then drove to Las Vegas, basically to hide out.
The agent told the source to meet him at the office at 5 o'clock the next morning. He needed to somehow confirm the caller's story.
He also said that he had worked with the DEA in prior investigations as an informant, and he provided me with the name of a DEA agent in Houston who could vouch for him.
The DEA agent confirmed that he had previously worked with the source and insisted that the man was to be trusted. After the FBI arranged protection for the intended victims in England, the informant described the murder plan. Preparations were made a few days earlier at the Los Angeles home of his former landlord, Ray Cologne, the man who had hired him. Cologne led the would-be hitman to his garage, where they met Cologne's brother-in-law, who had recently returned from scouting the victims in England.
Look, man, we want this
He told the informant that he could find his targets in the town of Blackpool on July 20th, when the exotic dancers were scheduled to perform there. Because of England's strict gun laws, smuggling a gun in was out of the question. Instead, Cologne instructed the hitman to kill his victims by fatal injection. He mixed a dose of cyanide powder into a small vial. They figured it could be smuggled past customs in a bottle of eye drops. The agent needed something more solid than the statement of one informant to bring in Ray Cologne. He consented to get Cologne on tape. The reformed hitman would call Cologne and pretend that he was still in England.
What we were trying to get from the telephone conversations was strong evidence that Cologne was a part of the plan to kill the two intended victims, if not the organizer of the plan. We had the information from the source, but we had to verify that through the tape conversations.
Hello?
Ray!
Yeah.
Barry, buddy! Are you sure that damn stuff is gonna work? It's pretty red, buddy.
Yeah, it'll work.
Oh, man, I don't want to...
But and if you want to add something to it...
How long is it gonna take before they croak and hit down? Is that an immediate, if not sooner?
Yeah, right. That's probably potent. You can even put a little, if you want, a little Drano on there if you want.
Well, it's gonna kill them right away then, huh? Okay.
It was evident from the beginning that Ray Cologne was not only a participant in this murder-for-hire scheme, but that he was actually the director of it. Cologne provided numerous suggestions to the source on how to best effect the death of these two intended victims.
What wasn't evident from the recordings was a motive for killing two managers of an exotic male dance troupe.
Do you know who hired Cologne?
During the conversations, Cologne had made reference to a third man who was providing money for the double murder. But the informant told Agent West that he did not know the man's name. 2 days later, on Wednesday, July 25th, 1991, a federal judge in California was convinced that the FBI had enough probable cause to search Cologne's Los Angeles home.
What's up?
Cologne was surprised by the warrant. It limited the agent's search to cyanide, travel records to England, and correspondence that could link Cologne and his brother-in-law to the intended murder. In the bedroom, they found flyers for the male exotic dance tour in England.
Harry, let me have a bag, will you?
They also found 2 handguns in a drawer. Records indicated they had been legally purchased by Ray Cologne. And since the warrant didn't specify weapons, the guns were not seized. In the garage, agents did find something the warrant had specified. A bag filled with cyanide. It corroborated their informant's story.
This is what he was talking about.
Then, one agent found something that would break the case wide open.
During the course of the search warrant, we found Cologne's address book. Special Agent Andy Stefanik from the Los Angeles office was going through that book, and he noticed the name of Steve Banerjee.
Agent West also discovered that Steve Banerjee, the well-known Los Angeles owner of Chippendales nightclub, had called Cologne recently.
The toll record showed several conversations, several calls going back and forth between Banerjee and Cologne. In addition, that same day, we received the results of interviews from the British police on the intended victims, and both indicated that Steve Banerjee was the only person they could possibly think of who would have a motive to kill them or would even want to kill them.
The 2 managers of the rival male dance troupe believed that Banerjee wanted them dead to stop them from competing with Chippendales. This was the same motive that New York authorities suspected was behind the murder of Banerjee's former business partner, Nick DeNoia. Agents called New York City homicide detective Michael Geddes to find out more about the 5-year-old DeNoia murder.
All of a sudden, I got a phone call from the FBI. I really got excited at that point because it was already maybe 5 years, 5.5 years or so. So it looked like we might have the opportunity to give the family their final piece.
But neither the NYPD nor the FBI had direct evidence against Steve Banerjee. And agents were still unsure if Cologne would be able to assist the murder investigation.
We at that time did not know whether or not Cologne was involved in the Nick DeNoia murder. The composite picture resembled Cologne, but it certainly wasn't a match.
Despite their uncertainty about Cologne's role in DeNoia's murder, they had strong evidence against him for conspiracy to commit murder. Faced with stiff jail time, the FBI believed he would talk.
Cologne knew that he had to take a hit. There was no question about that. He was caught red-handed in the planning of the murder of 2 individuals. So he had to accept the fact that he was going to go down for some time himself, but that it was going to be a lot less time in jail if he worked with us.
On August 2nd, 1991, agents arrested Cologne and his brother-in-law for conspiracy to commit murder. Cologne's arrest would increase the pressure to tell the FBI what he knew about Steve Banerjee and the murder of Banerjee's partner, Nick DeNoia. What the FBI didn't count on was that Cologne's arrest would make Chippendale's owner Steve Banerjee far more elusive. In August 1991, the FBI arrested Ray Cologne and his brother-in-law in Los Angeles for conspiracy to commit murder. Their 2 targets, who escaped unharmed, were managers of a male exotic dance troupe touring England. Agents believed that a 3rd man, Steve Banerjee, creator of Chippendales, had hired them to kill the men.
Watch your head.
Special Agent Dan West needed more than a hunch to arrest Banerjee. He hoped that Ray Cologne would provide something more solid.
He knew that, that his best chances of getting the best deal were to cooperate with the FBI. He had indicated to us that we only had a small fraction of the story. He took a sheet of paper, he said, right now you have this, and I can give you the whole page.
As agents had suspected, Cologne admitted that Steve Banerjee was the man who had hired him to carry out the murders. He also told agents that the wealthy Chippendales club owner had ordered the murder of his partner, Nick DeNoia, in New York 5 years before. For consideration of a lighter sentence, Cologne signed a proffer agreeing to help the FBI gather enough evidence to arrest Banerjee. Special Agent Scott Garriola from the FBI's Los Angeles field office learned that Cologne's association with Banerjee had begun by chance over a decade earlier.
Cologne had lived and managed an apartment building on the same street where Chippendale's Los Angeles club was. And by being so close in proximity, he would frequent the bar and over the course of time became close friends with Banerjee.
Cologne explained that his friend Steve Banerjee had immigrated to the U.S. from India in the early 70s. In 1973, the future millionaire opened a gas station north of the Los Angeles airport. He used the profits to purchase a failing West Los Angeles bar, and by 1976 had turned it into the nightclub that became famous as Chippendales. By then, Cologne had parlayed his friendship with Banerjee into employment. The out-of-work musician was happy to perform any job that Banerjee needed done.
Right off the street.
One service Cologne provided was arson. Banerjee wanted his competitors eliminated. Colon confided that Banerjee directed him to burn down nearby competition. A disco in Santa Monica was the first target in 1979. 5 years later, Colon torched another club. Neither arson attempt had been successful, and the clubs remained open. Banerjee didn't limit his targets to buildings. According to Colon, Banerjee also ordered him to hire a hitman to kill his partner, Nick DeNoia. Colon added that DeNoia had successfully sued Banerjee to prevent him from touring a second Chippendales dance troupe. The lawsuit, combined with costly merchandising overruns, forced Banerjee to file for bankruptcy. As instructed, Colon hired a hitman 3 months earlier. He claimed he remembered only the man's first name, which was Louis. On the day of the murder, Colon and Louis flew in from LA, rented a car, and drove into Manhattan. Colon waited on the street with the engine running until Louis returned from shooting DeNoia. The following night, Colon was back in Los Angeles. In Chippendale's parking lot, Banerjee paid Colon $12,000 cash, the balance of the original $25,000 fee. Colon's story was good, but it was only hearsay from a suspected conspirator. He might say anything to serve less jail time. Special Agent Garriola first needed to verify the facts Colon had presented.
At this point, all we had was somebody in prison telling us, well, it wasn't me, it was somebody else who was behind it. Your initial plan is to corroborate as much as possible what he's telling you. And that's what we did for the first couple of months.
With Colon's credibility secured, the FBI set out to get Banerjee and the hitman who killed his partner. Agents figured the only one Banerjee would trust enough to confess to would be his old friend Ray Colon, but they needed to get Colon close enough.
We had Colon released out of the jail where he was being housed under a proposed medical furlough because of his health problems. And we started sending communications to Banerjee via letter, messenger-delivered letters, and cryptic phone calls to try and get Banerjee to respond to him.
Banerjee refused to return calls or letters. He was suspicious of Colon, despite having paid him over $200,000 at various drops around the city to keep Colon loyal since his arrest. The FBI came up with another plan to compel Banerjee to respond to Colon.
We decided to force the issue and set up a meeting on our own terms. And we had Colon waiting across the street from Chippendales one morning.
As agents watched, Colon called to Banerjee when he emerged from the club. The Chippendales owner was curious as to why Colon was standing outside his establishment. Banerjee spoke to him in whispers, suspecting he may be wired. Agents had no way of knowing what Banerjee might be planning.
We took several precautions. If he hired somebody else, Colon, to kill somebody, why wouldn't he hire somebody to kill Colon?
Hoping to strengthen Banerjee's trust, the released prisoner provided the address of a bar where the suspected murderer was to send more money. Banerjee didn't trust Colon, but he couldn't afford to ignore him. He told Colon to pick up his payment the next evening. Agents set up surveillance on the bar. At about 9 o'clock, agents observed Banerjee stopping in front, checking the address, and then driving away. A short time later, a messenger delivered a package. Agents retrieved it from inside.
When we contacted the messenger company, that had sent the package. The pickup location where the package was received from was a bakery that was right next door to the building where the Chippendales dancers were practicing and rehearsing.
Back in the FBI offices, agents opened the package, not knowing what might be inside. It contained $14,000.
I guess we got them all.
The payoff meant that Banerjee would continue to keep Ray Colon close to him. But agents didn't know if Banerjee would talk, or if the hitman, known only as Louis, would ever be found. In the summer of 1992, FBI agents continued to surveil Chippendales club owner Steve Banerjee. He was suspected of ordering the murder of his partner more than 5 years earlier. Ray Colon, hired by Banerjee to arrange the murder, had been arrested and was cooperating with agents to capture the wealthy club owner. Wearing a wire, Colon met the East Indian entrepreneur at a hotel in Santa Monica, hoping to get his confession on tape. Special Agent Scott Garriola and his team were stationed nearby.
Banerjee immediately motioned for Colon to join him in the men's room. When the two of them went into the men's room, and Banerjee told him to be quiet, not to say a word, he searched Colon about 3 times looking for the wire.
Agents worried about what the suspected murderer might do to Colon if he found the wire. Colon's life depended on the FBI's skills at concealment.
All right? Okay.
Banerjee never found the wire, but it was clear that he did not completely trust his longtime friend Ray Colon. Out in the lobby, Banerjee insisted they communicate through notes instead of speaking. Agents recorded only scribbles and whispers. Banerjee wanted to know how much Colon had told the FBI and what they knew about, quote, the deed. Colon knew the deed referred to the murder of Banerjee's partner. The former musician denied that he had said anything to federal agents.
Once again, we were unsuccessful in getting an audible recording due to the fact that Banerjee basically whispered throughout the whole thing and wrote notes. And when Colon would raise his voice and try and talk, Banerjee would shush him, basically, by putting his finger to his mouth and saying, no, we can't talk.
Banerjee gathered the notes and returned to the restroom, this time alone. Despite his doubts about Colon's loyalty, Banerjee handed him another payment, this time in plain view of agents. The package held $30,000, more than twice as much as the first. Unfortunately for investigators, there was nothing illegal about giving Colon cash.
On its face, it's basically a loan for attorney's fees for Colon. Without the story on tape of how Colon and Banerjee were partners in these crimes, the money basically was not going to be able to do anything for the case.
After Banerjee's Mercedes was out of sight, agents hoped to retrieve at least a portion of the notes from the meeting. In the men's room under a toilet, one agent discovered a scrap of paper. It seemed that Banerjee had flushed the rest. Though it held only a small pen mark, it would help corroborate Colon's story when it came time to testify at trial. Colon did not remember the full name of the hitman he had hired in 1987, but he did recall that his first name was Louis, and he lived somewhere in East Los Angeles.
Colon didn't have a last name for him, didn't have an address. We had took him out a couple of times, had him drive us around the area, and he pointed out a house that he thought Louis had lived in.
Colon's memory proved correct. The woman who answered the door was Louis's mother. Since she did not know Cologne, she refused to tell him where her son was. Cologne told her that he wanted to provide work for him and handed her his card. In a few days, Cologne received a call.
Unfortunately, what we came across was Louis's brother, Andy, and we had to establish a relationship with Andy to try and find out where Louis was. So we had Cologne talking to Andy about various things. He needed to hire Louis back for a job, same job he had completed a few years prior.
After about a month, Andy finally told Cologne that he could find his brother, Roberto Rivera Lopez, in Los Angeles' county prison. Rivera, whose nickname was Louis, was serving time for possession of narcotics and would be out of jail in a few months. As a heroin junkie, he would need fast cash after his release and wanted to know more about Cologne's offer.
Cologne laid the groundwork once again for this new job that he wanted Rivera to help him with. And the plan that we had set in motion was that there was a witness to the homicide in 1987, and that Louis needed to go back and take care of that witness.
Near the end of 1992, Cologne met with the hitman for the first time in 5 years. With their conversation being monitored, the FBI informant slowly drew Louis Rivera in, detailing a new murder plot. If the FBI ever hoped to get the hitman confessing on tape, it had to be now.
His release date on the charge he was incarcerated for was, I believe, January 17th of '93. We were running up against the clock. And one of our concerns was that we had laid the groundwork for Cologne and Rivera, that when Rivera got out, he was supposed to contact Cologne to go and kill this witness.
Agents' worries were laid to rest. On Christmas Eve 1992, Rivera described his role in the murder of Nick DeNoia. At 3:30 p.m. on April 7th, 1987, Louis arrived on the 15th floor of DeNoia's building disguised as a messenger. The place was empty except for one man in the outer office. Moments later, when the office worker entered the men's room, Louis exited to kill DeNoia, figuring there'd be no other witnesses to the crime. He found the producer at his desk, pulled out a 9mm semi-automatic, and fired from 3 feet away. The FBI had it all on tape. Ray Cologne had fulfilled half of his agreement with the FBI to receive sentencing consideration on his charge of conspiracy to commit murder. The other half hinged on his ability to secure a taped confession from the man who had ordered DeNoia's murder, his longtime friend, Steve Banerjee. So far, more than a year after his arrest, Cologne had been unable to do that. By January 1993, the FBI's cooperating witness, Ray Cologne, had been unable to convince murder suspect Steve Banerjee to discuss aloud the crimes they had planned together. They had met several times, but Banerjee had been too paranoid or too clever to be recorded. At one meeting, Banerjee suggested he'd help Cologne hide out overseas. Special Agent Scott Garriola and his team used Banerjee's suggestion to form a new plan. Perhaps Banerjee could be lured overseas to talk to Cologne on foreign soil.
I don't think it was too difficult on Banerjee's part to accept the fact that Cologne was going to go overseas. I mean, he wanted to be rid of Cologne. He knew Cologne was the only person that could tie him into these various crimes dating back to 1979.
Since Cologne was still on Banerjee's payroll, agents believed it was likely that he would visit Cologne in person to be certain that Cologne had what he needed for an extended stay. Banerjee wanted Cologne out of his life permanently. The FBI selected Rome as their destination, since Italy's laws and police force are well adapted to surveillance investigations. Agents made extensive preparations before they arrived.
We acquired a phony United States passport for Cologne and an alias name, which you would expect someone who's on the run, a fugitive in another country, to have some kind of phony documentation. So we acquired that. We also entered Cologne into the nationwide crime computer as a fugitive. So in the event Banerjee had some kind of private investigator or someone check the computer, it would show that there was a warrant out for Cologne's arrest because he was now a fugitive.
With the cooperation of the Italian authorities, the FBI secured an apartment for Cologne in Rome that was wired for recording. When everyone was assembled, Cologne placed a call to Banerjee in California. The East Indian murder suspect understood that Cologne would use the code name Mr. Underwood when he called.
Yeah. Hey, this is Mr. Underwood. How you doing, Steve? Fine. So when can you come and discuss the particulars? I cannot go to Italy, but I can go to Switzerland. How about Zurich? Can you come to Zurich? No, that's impossible. Why can't you go to Italy? I know visa. Huh? It takes a month to get it.
There was a problem with Banerjee coming to Rome since he was not a United States citizen. He claimed he was not able to obtain a visa in time to enter Italy, and he wanted initially to meet us up by the Italian-Swiss border.
Banerjee finally agreed to meet Cologne in Zurich, Switzerland. The FBI had only a short time to make the new arrangements.
It was quite a challenge to get everything accomplished. Basically, this was a Friday, I believe, and it was basically one day since no one worked on a weekend back in the States. We had to get everything, all the necessary approvals for the travel, the country clearance. We had to get the U.S. Attorney's Office to contact, through a mutual legal assistance treaty, contact their counterparts in Switzerland to get the authority, the legal authority to do the consensual recordings. It was quite arduous, to say the least.
We will take...
Despite the brief turnaround time, the FBI and Swiss authorities would be ready.
Across towards the main door.
The plan was to wire Cologne for a meeting in the hotel lobby. Afterwards, the informant would suggest continuing the meeting in his hotel room, which would be equipped with audio and video devices planted by a special unit of the Swiss police. Two adjoining rooms were booked in a downtown Zurich hotel. One room they wired for picture and sound. The room next door would hold the monitoring equipment. Agents hoped that this time, their efforts would finally be rewarded with Banerjee's confession on tape. From the time of his arrival at the Zurich airport, Steve Banerjee would be under constant police surveillance. The plan was for Cologne to call Banerjee and arrange a meeting in another hotel late in the afternoon. As planned, Banerjee arrived first. Undercover agents and Swiss police were stationed throughout the hotel dressed as staff. He waited in the bar where he was expecting Cologne's call. On cue, the phone rang. Cologne was on his way. This was the FBI's best chance to get the recording they had long awaited. To be sure Banerjee's voice was taped clearly, they hid the wire inside Cologne's outermost layer of clothing, his coat. But Cologne seemed nervous and removed his coat when he arrived. As a result, investigators could no longer hear the conversation. Years of pursuit hung in the balance. It seemed unlikely that Banerjee would agree to meet Cologne again anytime soon.
We had ourselves a major problem. So what I initially did was, since I was monitoring the conversation from the outside, I went into the doorway of the restaurant, and hopefully in Cologne's line of eyesight, and I took my jacket off a couple of times, hoping he would get the idea to put his jacket on.
Nobody's going to come back as
Okay.
the receptionist.
But the agent couldn't get Cologne's attention.
Testimony isn't going anywhere.
Uh-huh.
The informant was apparently too nervous to look anywhere except directly at Banerjee.
The Swiss police, they came to our rescue. They went in there and they closed the whole restaurant down. They went in and talked to the owner, the manager of the restaurant, said, "Hey, we got a little problem. We need to shut this restaurant down." Fortunately, there weren't too many customers in there, and basically they closed the restaurant down, which forced Cologne and Banerjee to leave the restaurant.
After moving to a noisier bar in the hotel, Cologne suggested they'd be more comfortable relaxing in the room where Cologne was staying. Cologne arrived first. He was met by a Swiss technician who attempted to strip the wire from his jacket before Banerjee arrived. Cologne's device was an unnecessary risk since the room itself was wired.
We didn't know what Banerjee was going to do once the two of them were in the hotel. They had gone from a public place to strictly a private place, and we were a little concerned at this point for what Banerjee may have up his sleeve.
Undercover agents alerted the surveillance team that Banerjee had arrived on Cologne's floor. The Swiss tech retrieved the wire and stepped into the adjoining room. Cologne barely had time to pour himself a drink before there was a knock on the door. The first thing Banerjee did was check Cologne for wires. He found none and began to relax. Cologne poured him a drink.
Okay.
Then his old friend opened up.
In broad daylight, not something to happen.
Banerjee felt comfortable enough to talk about murdering his partner. He mentioned the $25,000 he paid to commission the deed. He also made comments about the men in England that he ordered killed. He even talked to Cologne about the arsons he had paid for back in 1979. After 5.5 years and 6,000 miles from the crime scene, the FBI's perseverance had finally paid off. At last, they had it all on tape, and Cologne earned himself an early parole.
That was the coup de grace right there. That was it. We got exactly what we needed. We pretty much corroborated Cologne, down to every I, dotted I, and every T that Cologne had told us.
On September 2nd, 1993, outside his Chippendales club in Los Angeles, Steve Banerjee was arrested for racketeering and first-degree murder. Facing life in prison, Banerjee's defense team offered the state's attorneys terms for an agreement. Banerjee would plead guilty to the charges and forfeit his interest in Chippendales for consideration in sentencing. New York State accepted, suggesting 26 years in a maximum security facility. But to Banerjee, the punishment was too severe. On the day of his sentencing in October 1994, he was found hanged in his cell. Michael Geddes, the New York City detective who investigated Nick DeNoia's murder 6 years earlier, was glad to see the case closed.
Ever since Steve Banerjee was arrested and Cologne confessed, what happened is I saw that Val DeNoia, the brother, and his wife actually change. You could see the peace in their face. You could see the smile coming back into their life.
Steve Banerjee had immigrated to the United States to fulfill his dreams of success. Blinded by his pursuit, he confused power and the accumulation of wealth with the American dream.